Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state.
Imagine a night at Windsor Castle when the walls shook, not from wind or storm, but from a secret no one was meant to see. A queen, a king, and a fire that could change everything people thought they knew about the monarchy. What really happened behind those doors? Why did one act of defiance set off events that shook centuries of tradition? And who really holds power when the crown is worn, but the throne is challenged? Tonight,
there's no doubt that the new monarchs of the United Kingdom are in their twilight years, so speculation has run rampant about what happens when they die.
we tell the story of ambition, rebellion, and secrets hidden from the public. A night when one woman decided that being a queen in name was no longer enough, and her actions changed the palace forever. Could a single daring move really shake a royal family? Or did it come at a price no one expected? By the end of this video, you'll see Windsor like never before, through the eyes of those who felt the fire, the fear, and the fallout that followed. A fire in Windsor. Change at Windsor Castle began quietly, almost too quietly to notice. For generations, the castle had stood as a symbol of order, ceremony, and calm. Every corridor and courtyard reflected a tradition that had endured through wars, weddings, and centuries of change. But one autumn evening, something within those ancient walls began to shift. The air felt heavier, the halls colder. To the public, everything looked perfectly ordinary. Yet behind the polished smiles and rehearsed formality, tension was quietly building between King Charles III and Queen Camilla. Britain, long accustomed to the steady rhythm of royal life, had no idea that a storm was forming, one that only two people inside the palace truly understood. It began during preparations for a major diplomatic occasion, the upcoming state banquet for German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier and his wife, Elke Budenbender.
A state banquet hosted by her counterpart in Germany.
What should have been a routine planning session to finalize seating charts and ceremonial details gradually turned into something far more personal. Pride, authority, and years of restrained frustration began to surface between the king and queen. According to palace insiders, that meeting marked the first visible crack in their unity. Camilla, who had long accepted a secondary position beside the crown, began asserting more control over decisions once firmly within the king's authority. Subtle changes appeared around Windsor. Certain staff were quietly replaced, traditional procedures adjusted, and the tone of internal communication shifted. Even small details, from decor to scheduling, began to reflect her touch. Those changes seemed minor to outsiders, but within the palace, they were significant. Camilla was no longer content to be a background figure. She wanted her influence to be recognized. But no one could have predicted what came next. On the night before the state banquet, Windsor Castle stood silent beneath a dark, rain-soaked sky. In his private study, King Charles sat at his desk, reviewing the final documents for the event: the guest list, seating plan, ceremonial order, and speech drafts. Everything was neatly arranged, every detail accounted for. To him, the evening represented more than diplomacy. It was a symbol of stability during a time when public trust in the monarchy was under scrutiny. Confident that the preparations were complete, he stepped away from his desk. Later that night, when he returned to the study, he was met with a sight that stopped him cold. Camilla stood by the fireplace, the official banquet file open in her hands. Without hesitation, she tore out several pages and dropped them into the fire. The flames flickered across her face, casting shadows that revealed neither fear nor anger, only calm determination. One by one, the papers disappeared, the royal crest curling and blackening as they turned to ash. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the steady crackle of the fire. Charles's shock gave way to disbelief. The documents she had burned contained official state plans, drafts of speeches, and seating orders personally approved by the Foreign Office. What to him represented duty, formality, and protocol, to her had come to symbolize exclusion. She had grown tired of being seen as a ceremonial partner rather than a contributing voice in the monarchy. Those who later learned of the confrontation described it as quiet but decisive. Words were exchanged, measured, restrained, but carrying the weight of two very different visions for the crown. Charles, rooted in tradition, believed in preserving the monarchy's order and symbolism. Camilla, by contrast, believed that visibility was power. She had endured decades of public judgment and had no desire to fade into the background now that she was queen consort. That night, her frustration reached a breaking point. By the time Charles left the room, the fire had nearly burned itself out. Camilla remained standing by the hearth, the faint orange glow reflected in her eyes. Whatever had passed between them, it had changed the atmosphere of Windsor permanently. The next morning, the castle felt different. Staff moved quietly through the corridors, exchanging nervous glances but saying nothing. The tension was palpable, even though no one dared to speak of it. Charles convened an urgent meeting to finalize the banquet plans again. The event, intended to celebrate diplomacy and unity, now carried an unspoken undercurrent of authority and control. Every detail mattered: the order of speeches, the position of guests, the floral arrangements, and even the tone of the press release. Nothing could be altered without his explicit approval. During that meeting, the king reassigned tasks with deliberate precision. The Prince of Wales, William, would oversee the ceremonial order. Princess Anne would handle security, and the Princess of Wales, Catherine, would coordinate media relations. Only after listing all others did he add Camilla's name, assigning her to oversee decorations and seating, a role symbolic of presentation, not power. Those present described the silence that followed as heavy. Camilla's expression remained poised, but the message was clear. A queen who had once shared in decision-making was now reduced to handling the aesthetics of an event she had helped initiate. When the meeting ended, she lingered in her chair, staring at the printed agenda. Her name, listed last, seemed to echo the message the king had sent. Her influence had limits. That evening, while the rest of the staff focused on final preparations, Camilla made one last quiet decision of her own. Retrieving the newly rewritten banquet plan, one that effectively erased her previous input, she destroyed it completely. The flames reflected in her eyes as she stood watching, silent and composed. It was not an act of rage, but of resolve. "If I cannot be part of this kingdom," she was heard to say privately, "I will leave my mark on it." That night, Windsor Castle, the historic heart of the British monarchy, felt the tremor of her defiance. The fire she lit consumed more than paper. It burned through unspoken loyalties, pride, and the illusion that the crown was beyond conflict. By morning, the castle returned to outward calm. The state banquet went ahead as planned, flawless in execution. Cameras captured polished smiles, elegant speeches, and the image of unity that the world expected. Yet those who had witnessed the tension behind the scenes said Windsor was never the same again. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the kind that settles after something irreversible has happened. From that night forward, the monarchy continued to move as it always had, graceful, composed, and controlled. But beneath the surface, the quiet power dynamic between the king and queen had changed forever. The silent coup. The morning after the fire in the royal study, Windsor Castle carried an unmistakable sense of unease. The corridors, usually filled with the quiet rhythm of routine, now echoed with anxious footsteps and hushed conversations. Staff moved quickly, but spoke softly, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Though no one dared to mention it openly, everyone understood that something significant had happened. Even King Charles III, sovereign of the realm, felt powerless to contain the change unfolding within his own walls. Windsor, the symbol of his authority, was slipping from his grasp. That morning, Queen Camilla summoned her longtime aide, Mrs. Hill, and gave a simple but decisive order. Beginning the next day, every member of the old household staff would be replaced. Her tone left no room for doubt. Within hours, Windsor began to transform. Familiar faces quietly departed, replaced by new staff, people loyal entirely to her. The shift was subtle but total. Luggage rolled discreetly through side gates, rooms were reassigned, and routines adjusted. What had once been the king's bastion of continuity was becoming a reflection of the queen's will. Camilla oversaw every change personally. The heavy red carpets were replaced with cream and gold tones, creating an airier, warmer aesthetic. Portraits of the king were rearranged or moved to lesser halls, while newly commissioned images of Camilla, most notably from her coronation, took their place. Even the portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales, long preserved in one of the gallery corridors,
that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed,
was quietly removed. Protocol was also revised. Staff were instructed to address Camilla as Your Majesty before acknowledging the king. The past cannot govern the present, she was reported to have said, a clear signal of her intention to redefine royal hierarchy. By mid-morning, Charles began receiving briefings about the sweeping changes. The scale unsettled him deeply. Every corner of the castle seemed to bear her influence. The furnishings, the atmosphere, even the scent of the freshly polished halls. The home that had once embodied centuries of monarchy now felt like contested ground. The king, already strained by health and public expectations, felt the weight of this quiet power shift, pressing heavily upon him. By noon, his exhaustion showed. His cough returned and his voice, usually steady, trembled with fatigue. Unable to manage the turmoil alone, he sent an urgent message to the Prince of Wales, requesting his presence at Windsor. "You must come at once," the message read. "Things here are no longer as they should be." That evening, Prince William arrived without public notice, entering through the side gates accompanied by a small team of trusted aides. As he stepped inside, he immediately sensed the change. The castle, though familiar in structure, no longer felt like the Windsor he had grown up in. The arrangement of art, the color of the carpets, even the scent of the halls seemed altered. It was as if the spirit of the place had shifted alignment. William requested to see the Queen. She received him in one of the smaller drawing rooms, her chosen chamber, recently redecorated in muted gold and ivory. Her demeanor was composed, her authority unmistakable. The discussion that followed was brief but pivotal. William presented evidence of her interventions, the altered banquet plans, the staffing changes, the symbolic rearrangements, and warned of the potential consequences. To him, this was no longer a matter of internal disagreement, but of royal integrity. The tension between them was palpable, though few words were exchanged. William made it clear that continued defiance would invite exposure, and that the monarchy could not endure such internal conflict under the public eye. For the first time, the Queen appeared shaken. Alone after the meeting, she sat silently in her chair, feeling the weight of what she had built, and the limits of her reach. Windsor, which had seemed to bend to her will, now felt distant and unwelcoming. The quiet ticking of the clocks seemed to mark the fading of her control. Yet even then, the spark that had driven her actions, the desire not to disappear into the shadow of history, remained alive. Exile and reflection. King Charles knew that the situation could no longer be contained. That afternoon, he signed an internal royal order that effectively suspended Queen Camilla from all state duties. The official statement, released to the press, cited health-related reasons and requested privacy. But within palace circles, the truth was evident. Camilla was being quietly removed from public life. It was a decision meant to restore stability, but it came at an immense personal cost. 3 days later, The morning newspapers carried restrained headlines announcing that the Queen would temporarily withdraw from engagements. Commentators praised Charles for his calm leadership and discipline, while speculating discreetly about the Queen's condition. Camilla had already been sent away, to an isolated abbey in northern England, far from the scrutiny of London and the court. The journey was discreet. No press cameras followed, no banners were raised. Only a small convoy of cars left Windsor before dawn, carrying a handful of aides and the woman who had, for a brief moment, redefined royal boundaries. As the car moved north, Camilla remained silent, her hands clasped in her lap. The countryside passed in quiet blur, fields, villages, and winding roads fading into the distance. Each mile seemed to carry her further from the power she had once claimed. The abbey that awaited her was ancient, built of gray stone and surrounded by ash trees. Inside, silence reigned. Upon her arrival, she was met by a small group of nuns who offered gentle guidance and little conversation. Her quarters were simple: a single bed, a narrow window, bare walls, and the faint chill of stone beneath her hands. "Here, time moves differently," one of the sisters told her softly. Camilla said little in return. The stillness of the abbey enveloped her, forcing her to confront the enormity of what had passed. In solitude, her thoughts often returned to Windsor, to the night of the fire, to Charles's expression, to the argument that had defined their fate. She realized that her rebellion had not been about destruction, but recognition. She had wanted, above all, to be seen, to stand as more than a supporting figure. Yet now, surrounded by silence, she faced the irony of her defiance. She had erased herself from the very stage she fought to command. Meanwhile, in London, the state banquet went forward without disruption. King Charles presided with measured dignity, restoring public confidence in the monarchy. The event was hailed as a success, and official photographs showed a smiling, composed sovereign. Camilla's absence was mentioned briefly in press reports before being forgotten. To the outside world, order had returned. Inside the palace, however, her shadow remained, a reminder of how close Windsor had come to fracture. At the abbey, days stretched slowly. Camilla walked the gardens at dusk, her pace unhurried, her thoughts distant. When asked once by a young nun whether she prayed, she replied quietly, "I only count what I've lost." The answer captured the tone of her exile, reflective, not repentant. Though stripped of title and audience, she retained her composure. The fire that had burned those papers at Windsor now lived only as memory, an act both symbolic and irreversible. In London, Charles occasionally paused by the palace windows, watching the rain trail down the glass. The order he had signed lay in his study drawer, a reminder of what leadership demanded and what it cost. Power, he realized, was never just about rule. It was about sacrifice, silence, and the constant balancing of image and truth. Camilla's exile lasted far beyond the public's attention span. Windsor returned to its routines, ceremonies resumed, and the monarchy appeared unshaken. But within the quiet halls and among those who had witnessed those days, the memory of her defiance endured. The story became a whisper among staff, a reminder that even within the most controlled institutions, human ambition still finds a way to surface. The fire at Windsor did more than consume paper. It ignited change. Queen Camilla vanished from the public eye, and the monarchy regained its image of control. Yet her brief act of defiance left a mark that would not fade. Life at Windsor returned to its polished normalcy, but the memory of that night, the choices, the power struggle, and the cost of ambition remained embedded in its walls. So what truly drove her that night? Was it ambition, frustration, or a final demand to be seen in a world that had long judged her? Perhaps we may never know the full truth. But one thing is certain. Even in the most disciplined palaces, fire still finds a way to burn. If this story made you see the monarchy in a new light, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts. What would you have done if the crown itself were at stake? And stay tuned for our next story, where we uncover more untold moments hidden behind the palace gates.